I never thought my life would involve a clandestine war fought over poultry, but life has a funny way of throwing absurdities at you when you least expect it. My name is Mark, and for the better part of 15 years, I've lived in a little slice of semi-rural paradise called Oak Creek Estates. I run a modest but successful landscaping and excavation business, a job that keeps me outdoors and lets me turn chaotic patches of dirt into something orderly and beautiful. I like simple, logical things: soil composition, drainage gradients, the satisfying roar of a well-maintained diesel engine. I don't like drama. I don't like conflict. I just want to do my work, come home to my quiet house on its 2-acre lot, and be left alone. For 14 of those 15 years, that's exactly what I got. Oak Creek was the kind of place people move to when they want the community of a suburb without the postage stamp-sized lawns and the neighbor who can see what you're eating for dinner. We had space. We had old trees that had been here long before the developer even dreamed up the name. The Homeowners Association was, for most of its existence, a benign and largely invisible entity. It was created for the sole purpose of maintaining the private road that wound through the neighborhood and managing the community well system. Dues were a couple of $100s a year, and the annual meeting was a sparsely attended affair where we'd approve the budget for road salt and gravel, then share a plate of cookies and go home. It worked because nobody tried to make it do more than it was supposed to do. It was a tool, not a weapon. Then, 2 years ago, Carol moved in. She bought the old Henderson place, the one with the wraparound porch and the biggest lot on the cul-de-sac. From the moment her moving truck arrived, you could feel a shift in the neighborhood's barometric pressure. Carol was a force of nature, but not the gentle, life-giving kind. She was more like a hurricane of opinions in a pantsuit. She was a recently retired project manager from some faceless corporation, and she brought the soul-crushing ethos of middle management to our quiet corner of the world. She saw a community of individuals and decided what we really needed was synergy, standardization, and a firm guiding hand. Her hand, specifically. Within 6 months of moving in, she had not only joined the HOA board, she had somehow gotten herself elected president, mostly because no one else wanted the job badly enough to fight her for it. That was our first mistake. We were apathetic, we were content, and Carol, like a fungus, thrives in the dark, damp corners of apathy. Her first official act was to commission a complete review of the HOA's founding documents, which were written in the 1980s and had the charmingly vague, live and let live tone of that era. Carol found this unacceptable. She saw loopholes where we saw liberty. The changes started small, like the first few drops of rain before a deluge. An email went out, the first mass email in the HOA's history, informing us of a new mandatory mailbox standard. The old, charmingly eclectic collection of mailboxes had to go, replaced by a uniform, beige, vandal-proof model that cost $300 and had all the personality of a concrete bunker. Then came the rules about trash cans. They could no longer be visible from the street, except for a 12-hour window on collection day. This was a particular challenge for those of us with long driveways. Then came the paint color palettes, the approved list of fence materials, and the infamous Lawn and Garden Standards document, a 20-page manifesto on the proper height of grass and the unacceptability of dandelions. People grumbled. They complained to each other over the fences they were now being told were non-compliant. But, for the most part, they complied. It was just easier. Paying for a new mailbox was annoying, but it was less annoying than getting into a protracted battle with a woman who seemed to have an infinite supply of time and righteous indignation. We didn't know it then, but we were feeding the beast. Every small concession, every grumbled compliance only made her bolder. Her crowning achievement, in her own mind, was the acquisition of her peacocks. She called them community mascots. We called them feathered demons. They were loud, obnoxious, and they treated the entire neighborhood as their personal toilet. And it was these majestic, screeching poop machines that would ultimately become the catalyst for the Great Oak Creek War. The day it all started was a crisp Tuesday in early fall. The air had that perfect, clean smell of decaying leaves and cool earth. I was in my home office, finishing up some invoices for a retaining wall I'd just completed, when I heard the mail carrier's truck pull up. A little while later, I wandered out to my brand new beige HOA-approved mailbox. Tucked between a gas bill and a flyer for a pizza place was a crisp, cream-colored envelope with the Oak Creek Estates HOA logo embossed on the corner. It felt heavier than it should, both physically and metaphorically. It was a certified letter. I had to sign for it. My mail carrier, a friendly woman named Sue, gave me a look of pity. "Looks official," she said. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Nothing good ever comes in a certified letter from an HOA. I took it inside, slid it open with a knife, and unfolded the single, heavy bond sheet of paper. The text was severe, printed in a sharp, judgmental font. "Official notice of violation," it declared at the top. It cited Bylaw 7, Section 4C, the keeping of unsanctioned livestock, including but not limited to poultry, swine, or cattle, on any residential lot is strictly prohibited. My brow furrowed. I didn't have any livestock. I had a golden retriever who was currently asleep on the rug, dreaming of chasing squirrels. I kept reading. "A violation was observed on your property, Lot 14, on October 12th. Please see attached Exhibit A." Below that, it detailed the penalty, a fine of $250, which would double if not paid within 14 days. I shuffled the papers and found Exhibit A. It was a grainy black and white photograph taken from a distance, clearly with a long lens camera. The photo showed a section of my front lawn, the one I meticulously maintained with the professional-grade equipment I owned for my business. And there, right in the middle of my perfect fescue, was a bird. It was a large bird, pecking at the ground. A thick black circle had been drawn around it with a marker, and an arrow pointed to it with the word "chicken" written in block letters. I stared at the photo. I stared at the word. And then I started to laugh. It wasn't a chicken. It was a peacock. Specifically, it was Kevin, one of the 3 peacocks Carol owned. I knew it was Kevin because of the slightly mangled tail feathers, the result of a close call with a neighbor's terrier. This wasn't a violation. This was a farce. My initial amusement quickly curdled into annoyance. This was ridiculous. It was a simple, obvious mistake. All I had to do was go over there, point it out to her, and we could all have a laugh about it and get on with our lives. That was my second mistake. I assumed I was dealing with a rational human being. I grabbed my keys, the letter, and the photograph, and walked the 300 yards down the road to Carol's house. Her lawn was, of course, immaculate. Her beige mailbox stood at perfect attention. It was a picture of oppressive order. I rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened. Carol stood there, wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater set that perfectly matched her violation notice. She had a tight, self-satisfied smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her eyes were like a hawk's, constantly scanning for imperfections. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" She already knew. The letter had been her opening salvo, and my appearance on her doorstep was the predictable response. This was part of her game. "Carol," I began, keeping my tone even and friendly. "I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. I got your letter." I held it up. "It's about this." I handed her the photograph. "You see, the thing is, this isn't a chicken. And more importantly, it isn't my bird. This is your peacock, Kevin. He was on my lawn yesterday morning." I gave her what I hoped was a disarming smile. Simple mistake, no harm, no foul, pun intended. She didn't smile back. She took the photograph and held it at arm's length, peering at it as if it were a complex legal document. She pursed her lips. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice losing its faux-friendly veneer and taking on the icy tone of a bureaucrat about to deny a critical appeal. "The bylaws are perfectly clear. Section 7, Section 4C. No unsanctioned livestock." "Right," I said, my own smile starting to feel strained. "But it's not livestock, and it's not mine. It's your pet peacock." She looked from the photo to me, her eyes narrowing. "The animal is on your property. The photograph proves it. The rule is about where the animal is, not who owns it. As the property owner, you are responsible for any and all violations that occur on your land. She tapped the paper with a perfectly manicured finger. The photo clearly shows a large fowl. Chickens are fowl. The bylaw prohibits poultry. It's a clear violation. I felt a surge of disbelief. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, willful ignorance. Carol, I am telling you, that is not a chicken. It is a peacock, a pavo cristatus. It belongs to you. Are you denying that you own peacocks? My birds are community mascots, she sniffed, and they are a symbol of the elegance and high standards we are trying to cultivate in Oak Creek. They are not livestock. They are ornamental. So an ornamental peacock is fine, but a phantom chicken is a $250 violation, I asked, the absurdity of the situation making my head spin. You can't be serious. I am perfectly serious, she replied, her posture stiffening. The rules are the rules. They apply to everyone equally. Your property had an unauthorized fowl on it. That's a fine. If you had an issue with the bird, you should have called animal control, not allowed it to graze on your lawn. It's your bird, Carol. You want me to call animal control on your own pet? The sheer circularity of her logic was maddening. That is not my concern, she said, her voice flat and final. My concern is the enforcement of the community standards that we have all agreed to. The fine stands. You have 14 days to pay it. If you fail to do so, it will double. If you continue to be non-compliant, we will place a lien on your property. That is the process. It's all in the bylaws. She tried to hand the letter back to me. I suggest you read them more carefully. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Miller. She closed the door in my face. Not slammed it, but closed it with a soft, definitive click that was somehow more insulting. I stood on her perfect concrete porch for a long moment, the letter still in my hand. The warmth of my initial amusement had been replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger in my stomach. This wasn't about a chicken or a peacock. This wasn't about a rule. This was about power. She had pushed a button just to see if she could, and she had no intention of backing down. I walked back to my house, the fall air suddenly feeling much colder. The war had begun, and I hadn't even known I'd enlisted. I refused to pay the fine, on principle. It was an absurd, fraudulent charge, and I wasn't going to validate her petty tyranny with my money. Instead, I sat down and wrote a formal, professional letter. I used my business letterhead to make it look as official as possible. In it, I calmly and logically laid out the facts, just as I had on her doorstep. I identified the bird in the photograph as her peacock, not a chicken. I pointed out that as the owner of the animal, she was the one responsible for its whereabouts, citing local leash laws that applied to all domestic animals, ornamental or otherwise. I formally requested that she rescind the fine and take measures to keep her community mascots contained to her own property. I sent it via certified mail, just as she had done, and included a copy of the original violation notice. I felt a small sense of satisfaction dropping it into the mail slot. I was meeting her bureaucratic aggression with my own. I was using reason. That was my third mistake. Reason was a foreign language to Carol. 2 weeks went by with no response. Then another cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one contained a new violation notice. The fine was now $500 for failure to remediate violation 1012A. Tucked behind it was a second brand new violation notice for another $250. Violation: unsanctioned livestock, chickens, on property. Attached was another grainy photograph, taken that very morning, showing another one of her peacocks. I thought this one was blue, admiring its reflection in my downstairs bedroom window. The circle and the label chicken were there again, like a bad joke that refused to die. She wasn't just ignoring my letter, she was doubling down, using my refusal to bend as justification for her escalating aggression. This became the new, insane rhythm of my life. Every few days, one of Carol's peacocks would wander onto my property, and like clockwork, a day or two later, a new violation notice would appear. Repeat offender chicken. Chicken on driveway. Chicken near mailbox. The descriptions were getting more creative, and the fines were stacking up at an alarming rate. I started my own file, a thick manila folder labeled the Peacock Papers. I documented everything. I took my own photos, in color and high resolution, of her peacocks on my lawn, carefully noting the date and time. I printed out ornithology websites with clear diagrams showing the difference between a chicken and a peacock. I sent a second, more forceful letter, again by certified mail, referencing my first letter and the new, multiplying violations. The only response was more fines. The total was now well into 4 figures. It was clear this wasn't just about me anymore. Carol was on a crusade, and I was just the most visible target. I started talking to my neighbors, quietly at first. I'd catch Arthur, the retired accountant from 2 doors down, while he was getting his newspaper. I'd chat with the Milligans when I saw them out walking their dog. The stories started pouring out. Arthur, a man whose idea of a wild time was planting a new variety of rosebush, had been fined because his garden hose was not coiled in a regulation spiral. The Milligans were on their 3rd warning for their son's basketball hoop, which was apparently an unapproved permanent structure. The most heartbreaking story came from Mrs. Gable, a widow in her 80s who had lived in Oak Creek since it was first built. She was a sweet gentlewoman who found her greatest joy in her flower garden. Her petunias were legendary. Carol's peacocks, it turned out, found them delicious. They had systematically destroyed her prize-winning flower beds. When she complained to Carol, she was told that the peacocks were a community asset and that perhaps her flowers were incompatible with the neighborhood's aesthetic. Then, to add insult to injury, Carol had fined her. Her crime? Unapproved statuary. The fine was for her collection of garden gnomes she'd been collecting for 50 years. Gnomes her late husband had given her. She was in tears when she told me about it, holding the crumpled violation notice in her trembling hand. She was terrified of the HOA, terrified of the fines, and terrified of the threat of a lien on the only home she had ever known. Seeing the fear in Mrs. Gable's eyes was the moment my frustration solidified into cold, hard resolve. This had gone far beyond a ridiculous dispute over poultry. Carol wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was a bully. She was preying on the elderly, harassing families, and sucking the joy out of our community, all to feed her own insatiable ego. And she was using the HOA, our HOA, as her weapon. The fines were just the ammunition. The real threat, the one that kept people in line, was the lien. The power to put a legal claim on someone's home is a terrifying thing, and Carol wielded that threat like a club. I looked at the growing stack of my own fines, now totaling over $2,000, and realized I couldn't fight this with logic and letters anymore. This was a legal attack, and I needed a legal defense. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I found David Chen through a referral from a contractor I worked with. His specialty was real estate law, with a particular focus on the snake pit of HOA disputes. I went to his office in the city, my Peacock Papers folder in my briefcase. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 40s, with a calm demeanor that was instantly reassuring. He listened patiently for a full 30 minutes as I laid out the entire saga, from the first beige mailbox to the latest chicken fine. I showed him the photos. I showed him my letters and Carol's escalating notices. I told him about Mrs. Gable and her gnomes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. He had a small, wry smile on his face. "Well, Mr. Miller," he said, "this is, without a doubt, one of the most creatively absurd cases of HOA overreach I have ever seen. And I have seen a lot." "So I have a case?" I asked, a sliver of hope breaking through my frustration. "A case?" he chuckled. "Mr. Miller, you have a work of art. Legally speaking, her position is preposterous. The selective enforcement, the misidentification of the species, the fact that she's fining you for her own animal wandering onto your property. A judge would laugh this out of court." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "But that's the problem. Getting it in front of a judge is expensive and time-consuming. And in the meantime, she can continue to harass you. She can file the lien. We can fight it, and we will win, but it will be a nightmare for you. It's a war of attrition. That's how these petty tyrants operate. They count on you giving up before they do. So what do? I asked, feeling that hope begin to dim. I can't afford a long, drawn-out court battle, and I can't just pay her. I won't. You don't have to, David said. We're not going to play her game. We're not going to fight her on the battlefield she chose. We're going to choose a new one. He tapped my folder. You've done the right thing by documenting everything. Now, we need to go on the offensive. You are a member of this HOA. You have rights. We are going to formally request, under state law, access to the HOA's complete financial records, all meeting minutes from the last 2 years, and copies of all contracts with outside vendors. What are we looking for? I asked. I don't know yet, David admitted. But people like Carol, people who are this obsessed with control and this brazen in their actions, they're rarely clean. They get sloppy. They think the rules don't apply to them. Your HOA dues are being spent on something. We're going to find out what. He gave me a sharp look. Stop communicating with her. Don't talk to her. Don't write her letters. Let every new violation notice she sends you become another exhibit in our file. In the meantime, you are going to become an expert on your HOA's finances. And talk to your neighbors. Get their stories. Get copies of their fines. We're not just fighting for you anymore. We're fighting for the whole neighborhood. I left David's office feeling like a switch had been flipped. The frustration and anxiety that had been my constant companions for weeks were still there, but now they were joined by something else, a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an investigator. I went home and drafted the formal request letter with David's help, citing the specific state statutes that gave me the right to the information. I sent it, once again, via certified mail. This time, I knew she couldn't just ignore it without breaking the law. A week later, a thick package arrived at my door. It was the HOA's records. Carol had complied, but grudgingly. The documents were a mess, disorganized, with pages missing and coffee stains on a few of the financial statements. It was the document equivalent of a sigh and an eye roll. She was daring me to find anything. So, I accepted the challenge. For the next 2 weeks, my evenings were spent not in front of the television, but at my dining room table, surrounded by stacks of paper. I had bank statements, invoices, meeting minutes, and a pot of strong coffee. Arthur, my retired accountant neighbor, caught wind of what I was doing and offered to help. His sharp, experienced eyes were a godsend. We started by building a spreadsheet, tracking every dollar that came in from dues and every dollar that went out. Most of it was boring and predictable. Road salt, insurance, electricity for the well pump. But then we got to a line item that started appearing about 18 months ago, shortly after Carol took over. Landscaping and beautification. It was a huge expense. In the years before Carol, the HOA had spent maybe $1,000 a year on mowing the small patch of grass by the entrance sign. Under Carol, that line item had ballooned to over $20,000 a year, paid out in monthly installments. 20 grand a year? Arthur whistled, peering at the spreadsheet through his bifocals. What on earth are they beautifying? The entrance looks the same as it always has. A few begonias and some mulch. That's not a $20,000 job. I pulled out the folder of invoices. They were all from the same company, Elegant Environments, LLC. The invoices were vague, listing services like horticultural enhancement, aesthetic maintenance, and my personal favorite, seasonal ambiance curation. There was no phone number, no address, just a post office box in a neighboring town. This feels wrong, Arthur said, tapping one of the invoices. This is either the most expensive lawn mowing service in the state or something else is going on. A cold feeling started to creep up my spine. It was the same feeling I got when inspecting a faulty foundation. Something was structurally unsound. On a hunch, I went to my computer and opened the state's online business registry. I typed in Elegant Environments, LLC. The search result popped up instantly. The company was registered, all right. It had been formed 19 months ago. I clicked to view the details, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I scrolled down to the name of the registered agent, the person legally responsible for the company. My jaw dropped. The name wasn't Carol. It was Carolyn Pruitt. It took me a second. Then I remembered a casual conversation at a neighborhood block party, long before she became president, where she mentioned her maiden name, Pruitt. Her maiden name was Pruitt. The address listed for the registered agent wasn't a physical office. It was a post office box. The same post office box listed on the invoices. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of nausea and cold, clarifying rage washing over me. "Arthur," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "you need to see this." He came over and looked at the screen. He read the name, then looked back at the invoice in his hand, then back at the screen.
A low, angry sound escaped his lips. That thieving son of a... He trailed off, his face pale with anger. "She's paying herself. She created a fake company and has been funneling our dues into her own pocket." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The absurd fines, the relentless pursuit of compliance, the Peacocks. It wasn't just about power, it was about money. The landscaping expense was so high that the HOA's budget was constantly in the red. The fines weren't just a tool for control, they were a necessary revenue stream to prop up her fraudulent scheme. She was fining Mrs. Gable for her gnomes to pay for her own phantom, seasonal ambiance curation. She was fining me for her chickens to cover the checks she was writing to herself. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was embezzlement. This was fraud. The discovery changed everything. The game was over. I was no longer on the defensive, trying to fend off ridiculous fines. I was on the attack, armed with irrefutable proof of criminal activity. The Peacock papers were no longer just a file, they were evidence. I immediately called David Chen. I explained what Arthur and I had found. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard a low whistle. "I knew it," he said, his voice laced with the grim satisfaction of a prosecutor who has just found the smoking gun. "I knew she was crooked. People like that can't help themselves. They get a taste of power, and they think they're invincible." His tone shifted, becoming sharp and professional. "Okay, Mark, here's what we do. Do not confront her. Do not tell anyone else yet, besides Arthur. We need to handle this carefully. We have one shot to do this right." Over the next week, David guided me through the process of building an ironclad case. We created a detailed dossier. It started with the original chicken violation, a symbol of the absurdity. Then, it methodically laid out the evidence. We had copies of dozens of bogus fines from multiple neighbors, showing a pattern of harassment. We had the HOA's bank statements, showing the checks paid to Elegant Environments LLC. We had the invoices from the company, with their preposterous, vague descriptions. And we had the printout from the State Business Registry, the silver bullet, linking the shell company directly to Carol's maiden name. Arthur, in his meticulous accountant's handwriting, prepared a summary financial analysis that showed exactly how much money was missing, nearly $40,000 over 18 months. "The annual HOA meeting is in 2 weeks, David said during our final strategy session. "That's our stage. This needs to happen in public. We need to dismantle her authority in front of the very people she's been terrorizing." He planned it like a military campaign. We weren't just going to present the facts, we were going to create a narrative. He helped me prepare a slideshow, a simple, powerful presentation of the evidence. "Now," David said, a glint in his eye, for the finishing touch. He made a phone call. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but it was brief. When he hung up, he was smiling. "I have a friend in the local police department who works in the white-collar crime division. I've given him a courtesy heads up. He's not going to act until he has a formal complaint and probable cause, but he's aware of the situation. And I've asked 2 uniformed officers to be on standby near the community center on the night of the meeting, just in case things get heated." The days leading up to the meeting were tense. I felt like I was holding a live grenade. Arthur and I, along with the Milligans and a few other trusted neighbors we'd brought into the loop, quietly spread the word. We didn't share the details of the embezzlement, only that I had discovered something important and that everyone needed to be at the annual meeting. "If you've ever been unfairly fined by Carol, you need to be there," was our simple, effective message. The neighborhood's underground network, once used for hushed complaints, was now a tool for revolution.
The night of the annual meeting was cold and clear. The community center, a small building usually occupied by a handful of people for these events, was packed. Every chair was taken. People were standing along the back wall and spilling out into the hallway. I saw faces I hadn't seen at an HOA meeting in years. Mrs. Gable was there, sitting in the front row, holding hands with her daughter. The Milligans were there. Arthur was by my side, his face a grim mask of determination. I had my laptop with the presentation ready, connected to a projector David had arranged for me to borrow. Carol and the other two board members, a mousy woman named Janice and a man named Gary who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sat at a long table at the front of the room. Carol beamed at the crowd, completely misreading the mood. She probably thought this record turnout was a testament to her leadership. She tapped the microphone. "Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to see such a fantastic turnout. It shows how engaged and proud we are of our beautiful community." She launched into her prepared remarks, a self-congratulatory speech about increased property values, a lie, improved aesthetics, her beige tyranny, and a 98% compliance rate on community standards, our fear. She droned on for 20 minutes, completely oblivious to the simmering anger in the room. Finally, she concluded, "And now, as per our agenda, we have time for homeowner comments. Please keep your comments brief." This was it. My heart was pounding in my chest. David had advised me to wait for one other person to speak first, to avoid looking like I was ambushing her. A man I didn't know stood up to complain about a pothole. Carol dismissed him with a practiced, condescending wave. "Thank you for your input. We'll take it under advisement." Then I stood up. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. I was the guy with the chickens, the neighborhood's most notorious outlaw. Carol's smile tightened. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness, "I trust you're here to inform us that you finally decided to settle your outstanding fines." "No, Carol, I'm not," I said, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the hall's acoustics. "I'm here to talk about your chickens." I clicked the remote in my hand. The projector whirred to life, and the first image appeared on the screen behind her. The grainy photo from my first violation notice, with the word chicken in bold letters. A low murmur went through the crowd. "For months," I began, "our HOA president has been fining me for harboring chickens. As you can see, this is the evidence." I clicked to the next slide. It was a beautiful, high-resolution photo of one of her peacocks in all its glory. And this is a peacock. Specifically, it is Carol's peacock. This is what she has been calling a chicken. The murmur grew louder, with a few chuckles mixed in. "This is not the proper forum for personal grievances, Mr. Miller," Carol snapped, her face beginning to flush. "Oh, I think it is," I said calmly. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a collage of the violation notices I had received, the total amount of fines, over $3,000, displayed in big red numbers at the bottom. I was curious why our president was so obsessed with fining me and my neighbors. Another click. A photo of Mrs. Gable's gnomes appeared on screen. Fining an 80-year-old woman for her garden gnomes? Fining families for basketball hoops. So, my neighbor Arthur and I decided to look into the HOA's finances. Carol shot a panicked look at Arthur, who stared back at her, his face like stone. "You have no right," she shrieked, half rising from her chair. "As homeowners, we have every right," I said, my voice rising to carry over hers. I clicked again. The first invoice from Elegant Environments LLC filled the screen. We found that our HOA has been paying over $20,000 a year to a company called Elegant Environments for services like seasonal ambience curation. I let that hang in the air for a second. We thought that seemed a little high, so we did some research. Click. The printout from the State Business Registry appeared on the screen. The name Carolyn Pruitt was highlighted in yellow. The room fell into a dead, shocked silence. You could have heard a pin drop. I saw Janice and Gary, the other board members, lean away from Carol as if she were radioactive. For those of you who don't know, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone, Pruitt is Carol's maiden name. Our HOA president created a fake company in her own name and has been paying herself with our dues for 18 months. Click, the final slide. It was Arthur's financial summary. Total funds embezzled from the Oak Creek Estates Homeowners Association, $39,750. The silence broke. The room erupted. It wasn't just a murmur anymore, it was a roar of pure collective outrage. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing. Carol was ashen. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. Lies! It's all lies! Forgery! Slander! She finally managed to screech, but her voice was lost in the din. Arthur stood up, his voice booming with newfound authority. I make a motion to immediately remove the entire board of directors, pending a full, independent forensic audit. Second, shouted a dozen voices at once. It was at that exact moment that the two police officers walked in through the back door. They were calm, professional, and very large. They scanned the chaotic scene, their eyes landing on me, then on David Chen, who was standing near the door, and gave them a subtle nod. They began to make their way through the angry crowd, a path parting before them as if by magic. They walked right up to the front table. Carol stared at them, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her. "Ma'am," the taller officer said, his voice polite but firm. "Are you Carolyn Donaldson?" She could only nod, speechless. "We have a formal complaint regarding fraud and embezzlement," the officer continued. "We'd like you to come with us to answer a few questions." The entire room went silent again, watching the final ignominious collapse of her reign. The fight was over. Justice, in a crisp blue uniform, had arrived. The aftermath was as swift and decisive as Carol's downfall had been. She didn't just go to the station to answer a few questions. Armed with David's dossier and my public presentation, which several people had recorded on their phones, the police had more than enough probable cause. The district attorney's office, smelling a slam-dunk case of white-collar crime, took over with enthusiasm. Carol was formally charged with multiple felony counts: embezzlement, wire fraud, and forgery for the invoices. The evidence was so overwhelming that she never even made it to trial. Faced with the prospect of a long, drawn-out public humiliation and a potentially lengthy prison sentence, she accepted a plea bargain. The terms of the deal were harsh but just. She was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security state prison, less than she deserved in my opinion, but more than she ever thought she would get. More importantly, she was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. The $39,750 she had stolen, plus interest, and enough to cover the HOA's legal fees, which included paying David Chen for his excellent work. To satisfy the judgment, she was forced to sell her house, the grand stage from which she had directed her reign of terror. The for sale sign on her immaculate lawn was a monument to her greed and a symbol of our victory. The Peacocks, her community mascots, were sold to a petting zoo in the next county. Their screeching, which had once been a sound of dread, was replaced by a beautiful, blessed silence. With Carol gone and her two feckless board members having resigned in disgrace, our community was left with a power vacuum. But this time, we didn't fill it with apathy. We filled it with purpose. Arthur, the man who had helped me uncover the rot, was unanimously elected as the interim president. He presided over a series of town hall-style meetings where we, as a community, completely dismantled Carol's oppressive regime. All outstanding fines were, of course, immediately nullified and expunged from the records. The illegal lien threats vanished. My own record was wiped clean, my name cleared. I was no longer the neighborhood chicken outlaw. I was the guy who had slain the dragon. It was a role I never wanted, but I wore it with a quiet sense of pride. The first order of business for the new interim board was to rewrite the bylaws. We went through them line by line, with Arthur leading the discussion. We were like the founding fathers of our own small nation, debating the nature of liberty and governance. We stripped out all the vague, weaponizable language about aesthetics and standards. We eliminated the rules about mailbox types, trash can placement, and lawn height. We added a new clause explicitly protecting garden gnomes. That one got a round of applause, and I saw Mrs. Gable wipe a tear from her eye. We instituted new ironclad rules for financial transparency, requiring 2 signatures on every check and a quarterly public audit of all expenses. The HOA was reborn. It went back to being what it was always supposed to be, a simple, boring tool for managing our road and our well, governed by common sense and mutual respect. The reign of tyranny was over, and the era of reason had begun. Several years have passed since the Great Peacock War.
Oak Creek Estates is quieter now, but it's a comfortable, peaceful quiet, not the tense, fearful silence that Carol had imposed. The neighborhood is thriving. People take care of their properties not because they're afraid of a fine, but because they take pride in their homes and in their community. The eclectic mailboxes have made a comeback. Kids leave their basketball hoops out. Mrs. Gable's garden is more magnificent than ever, a riot of color and a sanctuary for her growing collection of gnomes, which now occupy a place of honor in her front yard. The sense of community, which Carol tried to manufacture with rules and beige paint, has blossomed organically from our shared experience. We went through a fire together, and it forged us into something stronger. Property values have actually gone up, not because of enforced standards, but because it's a genuinely wonderful place to live. I saw Carol once after she was released from prison. It was a few years later. I was at a big box hardware store in a town about an hour away, picking up some supplies for a job. I saw her from a distance, pushing a cart of returned items. She was wearing the store's bright orange apron. Her hair wasn't perfectly coiffed anymore. It was dull and lifeless. The imperious confidence she once projected was gone, replaced by a weary, defeated slump in her shoulders. Our eyes met across an aisle of plumbing fixtures. For a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition, then panic, then a deep, profound shame. She quickly looked down, turned her cart, and disappeared into an aisle of light bulbs. There was no confrontation, no exchange of words. There was nothing left to say. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt a quiet, detached sense of pity for this diminished person who had thrown away everything for a little bit of power and money. It was a pathetic, anticlimactic end to the story of a tyrant. Sometimes, when I'm out in my yard, I think about the whole absurd affair. It's easy to laugh about it now, the chickens, the gnomes, the seasonal ambiance curation. But beneath the comedy, there was a serious lesson. I learned that bullies and petty tyrants draw their power not from their own strength, but from the silence of good people. They count on us to be too busy, too tired, or too intimidated to fight back. They start small, with a mailbox or a dandelion, and if we let them, they keep taking more and more until they own the whole place. Standing up to them is a hassle. It's stressful and it's inconvenient. But I learned that the cost of inaction is always higher. The price is your peace, your freedom, and the very character of the community you call home. The other day, I was on my riding mower, cutting my lawn to the exact height that I, and I alone, deemed appropriate. The sun was warm on my back, and the air was filled with the smell of fresh-cut grass. Arthur drove by and gave me a friendly wave. The Milligan kids were shooting hoops in their driveway. It was all so wonderfully, beautifully normal. I finished mowing, parked the tractor in the garage, and grabbed a cold beer from the fridge. I sat on my back porch, looking out over my yard, which was, I am happy to report, completely and utterly devoid of any poultry, sanctioned or otherwise. The quiet peace of the evening settled around me. It was a peace I had fought for, and it was worth every bit of the fight. It was home, and it was finally, truly, ours again.